The heavy wooden gate groans open, flooding the dark tunnel with the blinding light of the arena. A figure steps forward, muscles coiled beneath the sweat-slicked skin of a professional warrior. You picture him feasting on roasted boar and guzzling wine, a diet of pure protein to forge a killer, but history holds a secret. The truth about what powered Rome's gladiators is a mystery that shatters every modern expectation. By the end of this, you will know the real fuel behind these legendary fighters. We will uncover why they were known as the Barley Men and reveal the bizarre, ashy drink they consumed for strength. What does it take to build a warrior without meat? That popular image of a gladiator devouring a haunch of meat is a complete fiction, a story told by Hollywood rather than history. The real diet of these warriors was not built on animal protein, but on plants. Archaeological evidence from gladiator graves provides the undeniable proof. Scientists have analyzed the bones of these fighters, and the chemical story locked within the skeletal remains reveals a diet overwhelmingly dominated by grains and beans. There is no trace of the high meat consumption we would expect. This discovery shatters the myth of the carnivorous champion, replacing it with a far more puzzling reality. These were the Barley Men, a nickname that suddenly makes perfect yet strange sense. So why would the most physically demanding men in the Roman world, men who needed immense strength and endurance to survive, be fed a diet more akin to a peasant farmer than a conquering hero? The answer is not just about cheap food. It is about a sophisticated, almost scientific, understanding of the warrior's body that Rome had perfected. That nickname, the Barley Men, was not an insult. It was a job description. The Latin word was horderii, and it pointed directly to the foundation of their strength. Barley was more than just a food for these fighters. It was their primary fuel, consumed in staggering quantities. Think of a modern athlete carb loading before a marathon. Now imagine that as a way of life. Every single day, barley provided the complex carbohydrates that released energy slowly and steadily, a crucial advantage in a fight that could last for hours under the brutal sun. This was not about a quick burst of power. It was about endurance, the ability to withstand blow after blow and still have the stamina to press an attack. A diet rich in meat would have been counterproductive, leading to quicker fatigue. Barley, however, built a different kind of warrior, one who could outlast his opponent. The grain was so fundamental to their identity that it became their defining label in the historical record. When a Roman writer referred to the horderii, everyone knew he was talking about the men of the arena. Their very bodies were built from this humble, powerful grass, but barley was only half the story. To build a fighter's body, you need more than just slow-burning fuel. You need the very bricks and mortar for muscle. This is where the second and equally misunderstood part of their diet comes into play. The gladiator's strength was built on a foundation of beans, lentils, and chickpeas. These humble legumes were their primary source of protein. In our modern world, we are conditioned to equate strength with steak and chicken breast, but the ancient world operated on a different, and perhaps wiser, principle. These pulses provided all the essential amino acids required for muscle repair and growth, allowing a fighter to recover from the brutal training and injuries of the arena. Think of a modern athlete drinking a protein shake after a punishing workout. For a gladiator, a thick, hearty stew of lentils and beans served the exact same purpose. It was their natural, potent recovery formula. This combination of barley for sustained energy and legumes for muscle repair created a powerful, synergistic effect. The body had the carbohydrates to perform and the protein to rebuild, stronger than before. So the next time you picture a gladiator, do not picture a plate of meat. Picture a simple wooden bowl filled with a rich, beany porridge. That was the real power meal that forged a legend. While barley defined them, it was not the only grain on their table. Wheat was the undisputed king of the Roman world, and gladiators consumed it in enormous quantities, often as a coarse, whole grain bread or a thick, hearty porridge called pulse. This was not the fluffy white bread we know today. It was a dense, dark loaf packed with bran and fiber, ground by stone mills that left tiny fragments of grit in the flour. This rough texture was a hidden advantage. That grit slowly wore down their teeth, a telltale sign archaeologists find on gladiator skeletons. but the fiber and complex carbohydrates provided a sustained energy release that perfectly complemented the barley. Think of barley as the long-distance fuel and this wheat bread as the steady, reliable power that kept their muscles firing throughout a long day of training. It was the everyday staple, the caloric foundation that prevented their bodies from consuming their own muscle for energy. So alongside that beanie stew, a gladiator would have torn into a rugged loaf, chewing slowly, building the strength he would need to survive another day in the sand. This simple, powerful combination of grains and legumes was the engine of the arena, a far cry from the feasts of meat we so often imagine, but the story of their diet holds an even stranger secret, one that involves a mysterious, ashy drink believed to repair their very bones. This surprising plant-based diet is confirmed by the very bones of the gladiators themselves. Analysis of their skeletal remains reveals a chemical signature that is unmistakable. The levels of certain isotopes, particularly strontium and zinc, paint a clear picture of a person who consumed very little animal protein. Their bones tell a story written in barley and beans, not beef or pork. Historical texts support this archaeological evidence. The physician Galen, who treated gladiators, wrote about their diet being heavy in grains and pulses, describing it as cheap and effective. The economic reason for this is straightforward. Feeding thousands of gladiators across the empire on a diet of meat would have been astronomically expensive. Barley and beans, however, were cheap, plentiful, and easy to store, making them the perfect fuel for the empire's fighting machines. But there was another, more strategic reason. The Romans believed this specific diet, low in meat and high in carbohydrates, created a protective layer of fat. This was not seen as a sign of being out of shape. Instead, this subcutaneous fat was considered a vital form of armor. In a fight where the most common wounds were shallow cuts from swords and tridents, a layer of fat could mean the difference between a minor injury and a fatal blow. It could cushion a blow, protect underlying muscles and organs, and allow a fighter to survive a slash that might otherwise have been lethal. So the gladiator's body was engineered not just for performance, but for survival. The diet built endurance from grains, muscle from beans, and a literal shield of fat across the body. This was a calculated, professional approach to creating a resilient warrior, a far cry from the lean, ripped physique we might expect today. Yet the strangest ingredient in their diet was not a food at all, but a drink. After a brutal day of training, a gladiator would not reach for water or wine alone. He would consume a thick, gritty tonic made from charred plant ashes or even burned bone, mixed into a liquid. To our modern senses, this sounds like a bizarre, almost inedible practice. But for these fighters, it was a form of ancient sports science. This ashy concoction was their calcium supplement. Calcium is the mineral that makes bones strong and resilient, and for a man whose body was a weapon, a broken bone could be a death sentence. Their regular diet of grains and beans, while excellent for energy and muscle, was naturally low in this crucial mineral, so they found a way to add it back in the most direct way imaginable. The process of charring plants or bones concentrates the calcium into a fine powder. When mixed with liquid and drunk, this powder provided a massive, readily available dose of the mineral, which their bodies could use to constantly repair and reinforce their skeletons. Think of it as a primitive, powerful recovery shake designed to heal the microfractures and stresses that came with their profession. It was a direct response to a specific physical need, a way to ensure their very framework could withstand the incredible demands placed upon it. This ash drink was the final missing piece of their nutritional puzzle, turning a simple peasant diet into a warrior's regimen. Beyond the grains and the strange ash drink lay another crucial layer of their diet, one filled with flavor and vital nutrients. Fresh fruits and vegetables were the unsung heroes of the gladiators' daily meals, providing the essential vitamins and minerals that kept them healthy and resilient. Imagine the sweet, dense energy of figs and dates, easy to carry and eat during a long training session. These fruits were natural power bars, packed with potassium to prevent muscle cramps and simple sugars for a quick energy boost. Grapes eaten fresh or dried as raisins offered a similar burst of glucose, fueling short, explosive movements. But it was not all about quick energy. The humble onion and the potent clove of garlic were staples in their stews, valued not just for flavor, but for their powerful antibacterial and anti-inflammatory properties. In a world without modern medicine, A simple infection from a minor cut could be a death sentence. Consuming these vegetables daily was a form of preventative medicine, helping their bodies fight off potential illnesses and heal wounds faster. Then there were the leafy greens, foraged from the fields or grown in garden plots. These provided a wide spectrum of nutrients like iron for strong blood and vitamin C, which is critical for healing tissues and maintaining a robust immune system. This variety of plant foods acted as their natural pharmacy, ensuring that the body built by barley and beans could also defend itself and recover from the immense physical stress of their lives. A gladiator's strength was not just in his muscles, but in his overall health, a vitality sustained by the colorful, often overlooked bounty of the Roman earth. There was another form of liquid gold in the gladiators' world, more precious than wine. Olive oil was a cornerstone of their diet, consumed in quantities that would surprise us today. This was not a mere drizzle for cooking. It was a primary source of calories, a dense fuel that complemented the grains and beans perfectly. While barley provided slow-burning carbohydrates, olive oil delivered a concentrated burst of healthy fats. These fats were essential for long-term energy storage, crucial for surviving a prolonged battle where every movement counted. Think of it as the high-octane fuel in their tank, the reserve power they could draw upon when their carbohydrate stores began to wane. It also played a vital role in digestion, helping their bodies absorb the fat-soluble vitamins from their vegetable-heavy meals, ensuring no nutrient was wasted. But its use did not stop at consumption. After a fight, a gladiator's bruised and cut body would be slathered in this very same oil. It acted as a primitive yet effective antiseptic balm. The oil would create a protective barrier over wounds, shielding them from dirt and infection while keeping the skin supple and promoting healing. So from the inside out, olive oil fortified the warrior, fueling his performance and then tending to his recovery. This single substance was kitchen, pharmacy, and training aid, all in one. Another layer to their diet may have been quietly working to keep their entire system in balance. The Roman world, long before refrigeration, mastered the art of preservation through fermentation. It is highly probable that gladiators regularly consumed foods like cheese and yogurt and drank fermented beverages beyond just wine. These were not mere staples, they were delivering a hidden health benefit we fully understand only today: probiotics. A healthy gut is the foundation of a strong immune system, and for a gladiator facing constant physical stress and the threat of infection, robust gut health was not a luxury. It was a matter of survival. The live bacteria in these fermented foods would have helped maintain a balanced digestive system, allowing them to better absorb every possible nutrient from their barley, beans, and vegetables. This efficient absorption was critical. Their bodies needed to extract every last bit of energy and building material from their primarily plant-based meals. Think of a modern athlete who prioritizes gut health to improve performance and recovery. The gladiators, through the practical necessities of their time, were likely doing the very same thing. A simple piece of hard cheese or a cup of yogurt was more than just food. It was a tool that ensured the powerful, plant-based engine of their body was running as efficiently as possible, turning simple meals into legendary strength. Thirst in the arena was a constant, brutal enemy. Under the scorching sun and the weight of heavy armor, a gladiator's body would lose water at a staggering rate. Simply drinking from a well or a public fountain, however, was a dangerous gamble. Untreated water in the ancient world was a cocktail of bacteria, a quick path to debilitating sickness. So what did these fighters drink to stay alive and combat ready? Their primary beverage was not plain water, but a sharp, tangy drink called pasca. This was the same humble brew that sustained Roman legions on their long marches across the empire. Pasca was a simple mixture of vinegar, water, and sometimes a little honey or herbs for flavor. To our modern palates, it might sound unappealing, but for a gladiator, it was a lifesaver. The acidity of the vinegar acted as a natural purifier, killing many of the harmful pathogens that could lurk in the water supply. This was their ancient and remarkably effective form of water purification. Every sip was hydrating and safe, a crucial advantage when a bout of dysentery could be as fatal as a sword stroke, but the benefits did not stop there. The slight acidity also made pasca a surprisingly effective thirst quencher, stimulating saliva and encouraging a fighter to drink more. ensuring he stayed properly hydrated through long, exhausting bouts. This was not a gourmet experience, it was practical battlefield science in a cup. While wine was certainly available in the Roman world, it was often heavily diluted with water. For a gladiator, a clear head and steady hands were paramount. The intoxicating effects of strong wine would have been a severe liability in a life-or-death situation. Posca provided the hydration without the impairment. It was the perfect functional beverage for a professional warrior, delivering the fluids he desperately needed while actively protecting him from the invisible threats that could end his career and his life just as surely as a well-aimed trident. So the next time you picture a gladiator quenching his thirst, do not imagine a flagon of wine. Imagine a simple clay cup filled with a sharp, sour liquid that tasted like survival itself. The first light of dawn would find a gladiator already moving, his body fueled by a simple, powerful breakfast. His first meal was not a feast, but a thick, warm porridge known as pulse. This was not a small bowl of oatmeal. It was a massive serving of emmer wheat or barley, boiled slowly in water or milk until it formed a dense, sticky mass. Think of it as a slow-release energy capsule, a reservoir of complex carbohydrates designed to be tapped for hours. He would eat this plain, or perhaps with a drizzle of olive oil or a handful of dried figs mixed in, consuming enough calories to power him through a grueling morning of training without his stomach feeling heavy. This was the foundational fuel, the initial charge for the day's brutal demands. As the sun climbed higher and the training grounds grew hot, the real work began. Under the watchful eye of his trainer, the Lanista, the gladiator would drill for hours. He practiced sword strokes with a weighted wooden rudis, lifted heavy sacks of sand to build functional strength, and sparred relentlessly with his fellow fighters. This was not a gentle workout, it was a full-scale simulation of combat, draining his energy reserves completely. During a short break, he might reach for a quick, digestible snack to keep his energy from crashing. A handful of dates, a chunk of coarse bread, or a drink of Posca would provide a rapid glucose boost and essential electrolytes, staving off muscle cramps and mental fatigue. This was tactical eating, a small intervention to maintain peak performance until the main recovery meal. The most important meal of his day came after the final training exercise, when his muscles were screaming for repair. This was not a light lunch, this was the primary opportunity to rebuild his body, and the meal reflected that critical purpose. He would sit down to a large, steaming bowl of a hearty stew. The base was always the same, a generous portion of barley or lentils, but this is where the protein and nutrients were loaded in. The pot would be filled with chickpeas, fava beans, and onions, all simmered for hours with generous glugs of olive oil and plenty of garlic. This thick beanie concoction was his ancient protein shake, delivering the essential building blocks his muscles needed to recover and grow stronger from the micro tears of intense exercise. He would eat this with more of that dense, gritty bread, using it to scoop up every last bit, ensuring no precious calorie or nutrient was wasted. This post-training meal was the cornerstone of his physical maintenance, a deliberate act of recovery as crucial as the training itself. As evening settled over the ludus, his final meal was often a quieter, simpler affair. It might be a repeat of the midday stew, or perhaps just more bread with cheese and olives, accompanied by the ever-present Posca. The goal now was not to load up for immediate action, but to provide a steady trickle of nutrients through the night, aiding the body's natural healing processes as he slept. The entire daily cycle was a precise, practical routine. From the carb-heavy start to the protein-rich finish, every bite was calculated for a single purpose: to forge and maintain a human weapon. This was not a diet of indulgence, it was a relentless, efficient engine of plant-based power, consumed with the grim determination of a man who knew his next meal depended entirely on his survival. The kitchen in a gladiator school was not a small domestic space, it was a culinary engine room, a place of relentless, large-scale production designed to fuel an army of fighters. Feeding dozens, sometimes hundreds of men required an industrial approach to cooking. At the heart of this operation stood massive, permanent cauldrons, huge bronze pots set over constant, low-burning fires. These were not for delicate sauces, they were for volume. Inside these vast vessels, a thick porridge of barley and wheat bubbled for hours, a staple base that would be served at nearly every meal. Alongside them, equally large pots simmered with the daily stew, a mixture of lentils, chickpeas, and beans that cooked slowly to become soft and digestible. The primary cooking method was boiling. It was the most efficient way to cook tough grains and dried legumes, to extract every bit of nutrient, and to stretch modest ingredients into a filling meal for a multitude. Baking was the other pillar of this kitchen. A large wood-fired oven, its interior radiating intense heat, produced loaf after loaf of the coarse, dark bread that was the other half of a gladiator's sustenance. The sheer scale of the ingredients moving through this space was staggering. Sacks of barley and wheat, amphorae of olive oil, and baskets of dried beans were the standard inventory, all purchased in bulk to keep costs manageable. The men who worked here were not gourmet chefs. They were laborers, perhaps slaves themselves, whose job was one of pure practicality, not artistry. Their task was to follow a simple, unchanging formula to produce massive quantities of calorie-dense, functional food, day after day. There was no room for variation or waste. Every ounce of grain, every drop of oil was measured against its ability to transform into human strength and endurance. This kitchen was a factory, and its product was the power that walked out onto the sand. The entire system of a gladiator school, from its training grounds to its industrial kitchen, was a massive financial undertaking. So who was footing the bill for all that barley, olive oil, and beans? The man with the purse strings was the Lannister, the owner and manager of the gladiatorial troupe. He was not a philanthropist, he was a businessman, and every gladiator under his roof was a significant capital investment. The purchase price for a new fighter, whether he was a slave, a prisoner of war, or a free man in debt, was substantial. Then came the ongoing costs, the food, the housing, the medical care, and the trainers. The Lannister saw this constant outflow of money not as an expense, but as a necessary investment to protect and enhance the value of his assets. A well-fed gladiator was a gladiator who could train harder, recover faster, and most importantly, win more fights. A winning fighter brought in more prize money and increased his own value exponentially, both in terms of his potential sale price and the fees the Lannister could command for his appearances. The specific plant-heavy diet was the most cost-effective way to achieve this. Feeding a man on barley and lentils was vastly cheaper than feeding him on steak, yet it produced the desired result, a resilient, enduring warrior. The Lannister was essentially funding a high-performance diet to ensure a high return on his investment. Every bowl of pulse and every ladle of bean stew was a calculated deposit into the bank of a gladiator's physical capital, an investment the Lannister fully expected to pay dividends in the roaring arena. This specific diet was not an accident. It was the fuel for a brutally precise training machine. The goal was never to create a bodybuilder with bulging, sculpted muscles. That type of physique built on pure protein would have been a liability in the arena, tiring quickly under the weight of armor and the strain of prolonged combat. Instead, the gladiators' regimen was engineered to produce a different kind of athlete entirely, one defined by stamina and resilience. Their training focused on functional strength and relentless endurance. They practiced complex fighting sequences for hours, lifted heavy, awkward objects to mimic grappling an opponent, and sparred relentlessly. This was not about short, explosive power. It was about sustaining a high level of performance for an unpredictable amount of time. Their bodies were being conditioned for a marathon of violence. And the high-carbohydrate, plant-based diet was the perfect fuel for this exact purpose. Think of a modern long-distance runner. Their diet is packed with pasta, rice, and other complex carbs to load their muscles with glycogen, the primary fuel for endurance. The gladiator's bowl of barley porridge served the exact same function. It provided a slow, steady release of energy, preventing the muscle fatigue that would have set in quickly on a high-protein, low-carb diet. The layer of fat their diet encouraged was also a direct result of this strategy. That fat was not just protective armor against cuts, it was also an emergency energy reserve. When the glycogen from the barley and bread was depleted during an exhausting fight, the body could then begin to tap into these fat stores, giving the fighter a crucial second wind when his opponent was flagging. Every aspect of their food, from the gritty bread to the beanie stew, was calibrated to support a body that could outlast, endure, and survive. This was the real secret of their strength, a perfect synergy between the kitchen and the training ground, forging a warrior built not for a sprint, but for a grueling test of will. Their bones still tell the story of their strength. When scientists analyze the skeletal remains of gladiators, they are not just looking at fractures and old wounds. They are reading a chemical biography written in the very minerals of their bones. One element in particular, strontium, provides the definitive evidence. Strontium is absorbed by the body from plants and to a much lesser extent from meat. The bones of these fighters show remarkably high levels of this element, a clear and undeniable signature of a diet overwhelmingly dominated by barley, wheat, and beans. This is the final scientific nail in the coffin for the myth of the meat-eating gladiator. Their bodies were literally built from the ground up by plants. But this evidence leads to another, more visual question. If their diet was so rich in carbohydrates and designed to build a protective fat layer, what did a gladiator's body actually look like? Forget the lean, chiseled physique of a modern bodybuilder. The body composition of a successful gladiator would have been strikingly different. He would have carried a significant amount of body fat, perhaps even appearing somewhat stocky or thick around the middle by today's standards. This was not a sign of being out of shape. It was a calculated, functional layer of insulation and armor. Beneath that layer of fat, however, was a foundation of incredibly dense, powerful muscle. This was not the bulging, sculpted muscle built for show. It was the dense, fibrous, and highly efficient muscle built for a singular purpose: endurance. Think of the functional strength of a powerful wrestler or a professional strongman, not the defined physique of a sprinter. His shoulders, back, and legs would have been massive from constant drilling with heavy weapons and shields, but that muscle would have been covered by a smooth, protective sheath of fat. This unique body composition, a powerful engine wrapped in a protective cushion, was the direct result of his training and his specific plant-based fuel. The so-called gladiator glow was not the shine of oil alone. It was the reflection of a body perfectly engineered for survival, a formidable blend of endurance, strength, and resilience that we are only now beginning to fully understand. While the gladiator was a specialist in endurance, the Roman legionary was a master of mobility. The soldier's diet reflected this fundamental difference in purpose. A legionary on the march consumed a startling amount of meat, far more than the arena fighter. His rations were built for a man covering 20 miles a day in full kit, a feat of sustained power that required a different kind of fuel. Archaeological evidence from military camps across the empire is filled with the bones of cattle, sheep, and pigs, a testament to the regular meat consumption that was a standard part of a soldier's pay. This protein was essential for rebuilding muscle after long, grueling marches and for the explosive, powerful actions required in set-piece battles. A legionary's combat was often about a few minutes of extreme, coordinated violence, a shield wall slamming into an enemy line. That demand for sudden, intense power was met with meat. The gladiator, in contrast, was an endurance athlete. His fights were individual, unpredictable, and could last for a very long time. His body needed the slow, steady burn of carbohydrates, not the quick, dense fuel of animal protein. This is why the legionary ate beef and the gladiator was known as the Barley man. Their bodies were tools and their diets were precisely calibrated for the specific tasks they had to perform. The legionary was a diesel engine built for long hauls with powerful torque. The gladiator was a hybrid engine designed for maximum efficiency and stamina over an unpredictable course. Even their calorie intake told a story of different demands. A legionary, especially on campaign, could consume well over 3,000 calories a day to sustain his relentless activity. A gladiator's intake was also massive, but it was strategically composed to build that protective fat layer and fuel his specific training. The soldier needed to be lean and powerful. The gladiator needed to be resilient and enduring. One was built for the long road and the decisive charge, the other for the swirling, personal duel in the sand. This dietary strategy was rooted in a sophisticated, if ancient, medical philosophy. The Roman physician Galen, who gained invaluable experience treating wounded gladiators, championed a clear theory about food and the body. He argued that different foods produce different qualities of flesh and blood. A diet heavy in meat, according to this system, was believed to generate thick, viscous blood and a bilious, aggressive temperament. While aggression might seem useful for a fighter, the Romans saw it as a liability. A fighter governed by hot, volatile emotions was unpredictable and prone to making fatal errors in the arena. The ideal gladiator was not a raging berserker. He was a calm, disciplined, and enduring combatant, and his food was chosen to cultivate that exact state. The grains and legumes that formed his dietary core were classified as cold and dry foods. This did not refer to their temperature, but to their fundamental essence within the humoral system of medicine. These foods were thought to produce a cooler, more balanced bodily state, leading to a stable mind and a body built for sustained effort, not just explosive fury. This was a deliberate act of physiological engineering, using diet to craft not just a strong body, but a specific type of resilient and controlled warrior. Galen and his contemporaries observed that this plant-based regimen produced exactly the kind of fighter the Lannister wanted, one with immense stamina and a steady nerve. The layer of subcutaneous fat so carefully cultivated by the barley and bread was also viewed through this medical lens. It was not merely passive padding. This fat was considered a form of healthy protective tissue that strengthened the body's overall constitution. It was seen as superior to hard, dense muscle alone, which could become tense and prone to injury. The soft fat layer allowed for greater flexibility and, crucially, helped the body resist and recover from the traumatic blows and slashing wounds of combat. A deep cut into muscle could cripple a man, but a shallow slash that stopped in the fat was a survivable injury. This medical perspective justified the entire dietary system. Every bowl of pulse and every ladle of bean stew was not just cheap fuel. It was a prescription for creating a specific, optimized human instrument, a fighter whose body and mind were perfectly aligned for the grim profession of survival. The night before the grand spectacle, an unusual feast was laid out for the men of the arena. This was the Cena Libera, the free dinner, a lavish public banquet that has become shrouded in legend. It is easy to envision a final decadent meal of roasted meats and fine wines, a last taste of luxury for men facing possible death. But was this tradition a genuine meat-filled exception to their strict regimen, or is it a story romanticized by history? The truth is more complex and psychologically shrewd. While the Cena Libera was indeed a real event, its purpose was far more calculated than simple indulgence. This was a public relations spectacle. The banquet was open for citizens to walk through and see the gladiators, to build hype for the coming games and present the fighters not as desperate men, but as celebrated, courageous athletes. The Lannister was showcasing his valuable stock. Offering a meager meal of barley porridge would not have inspired the crowd, so the fare was undoubtedly upgraded. There would have been better bread, more varieties of fruit, higher quality olive oil, and yes, probably some meat, but this was not a dietary overhaul. It was a performance. The primary goal was not to stuff the gladiators with heavy, unfamiliar food that could slow them down in the morning. Imagine a modern athlete the night before a championship game. They might have a special team dinner, but they are not going to eat a giant, greasy feast that will upset their stomachs. They stick to familiar, performance-oriented foods, perhaps just a better version of their usual meal. The Cena Libera likely followed this same principle. The gladiators would have eaten well, but not foolishly. They might have enjoyed a stew with some meat in it, or a taste of roasted fowl, but their plates would still have been filled with the reliable carbohydrates they depended on, the bread and the grains that were the true foundation of their strength. This feast was as much for the audience as it was for the fighters, a ritual that fed the legend of the gladiator while carefully preserving the body that had to perform in it. The gladiator's diet was not a rigid universal recipe handed down from Rome. Across the vast expanse of the empire, from the sun-baked sands of North Africa to the damp forests of Britain, the contents of a fighter's bowl were shaped by the land itself. While the core principles of high-carbohydrate, plant-based fuel remained constant, the specific ingredients were a product of local agriculture. A gladiator training in Egypt, for instance, would have lived on a foundation of emmer wheat, a grain that thrived in the Nile's fertile soil. His daily pulse would have been thick with it, and his bread would have been a dense, flat loaf more akin to what we might call a pita today. In the colder, wetter climate of Gaul, oats and rye would have been more common staples, creating a porridge with a heartier, earthier flavor than the barley-based version common in Italy. The protein sources shifted with the landscape as well. While lentils and chickpeas were widespread, a fighter in a coastal ludus might have found his stew enriched with dried fish or shellfish. adding a potent, briny source of protein and minerals unavailable to his inland counterparts. Even the prized olive oil, so central to the Italian diet, had regional substitutes. In parts of the empire where olive trees did not grow, local fats like lard from pigs or butter from cattle and goats would have taken its place, providing the necessary calories and fat-soluble vitamins. This was not a deviation from the system, but an adaptation of it. The goal was always the same: to build a resilient, enduring warrior using the most efficient and available local resources. So the strength of a gladiator in Roman Britain was forged by oats and perhaps a bit of local butter, while a fighter in Syria drew his power from chickpeas and sesame oil. The empire was a mosaic of local flavors, and the gladiator, a product of his specific corner of that world, carried the taste of his homeland into the arena. This unique diet was a matter of life and death from the first clash of swords. When a gladiator stepped onto the sand, his body was running on a specific type of fuel, and that fuel dictated his every move. The slow-burning energy from his barley porridge and coarse bread meant he did not tire quickly, while an opponent fueled by a heavier, meat-centric meal might have started with more explosive power. That energy would fade fast under the glaring sun. The gladiator, however, could maintain a steady, relentless pace. His muscles, fed by a constant drip of carbohydrates, allowed him to keep his shield up to parry blows and to press his advantage long after a less enduring fighter had begun to falter. This stamina was his primary weapon. It allowed him to wait for an opening, to study his opponent's weakening form, and to strike when the moment was perfect. But endurance was only part of the equation. That carefully cultivated layer of fat, a direct result of his high-carb diet, played an active role in his survival. The most common wounds in the arena were not deep, penetrating stabs, but slashing cuts from swords and the glancing blows of tridents. A lean, heavily muscled body offered little protection against such attacks. A slash that cut through muscle could sever a tendon or a major blood vessel, ending a fight and a life in an instant. For the well-padded gladiator, that same slash often stopped at the subcutaneous fat. It was a painful, bloody wound to be sure, but it was rarely fatal. This fatty layer acted as a biological shield, absorbing the impact of blows and protecting the vital structures beneath. It was the difference between a survivable injury and a career-ending or life-ending catastrophe. This directly translated into career longevity. A gladiator who could survive minor wounds, recover quickly, and return to train and fight again was a more valuable asset. His diet was not just about winning a single bout. It was about ensuring he lived to fight dozens more, building a reputation and a career that could, against all odds, one day lead to freedom. The food in his bowl was his first and most reliable line of defense. Hollywood has painted a powerful and entirely misleading picture of the gladiator's last meal. We see Russell Crowe's Maximus sitting down to a lavish feast before his battle, tables groaning with roasted meats, whole suckling pigs, and overflowing goblets of wine. It is a dramatic and compelling image, but it is pure fiction when held up to the archaeological and historical evidence. This meat-heavy myth persists because it aligns with our modern, deeply ingrained belief that supreme physical power must come from animal protein. We project our own cultural assumptions onto the past, assuming that because we value meat for strength, the Romans must have as well. The reality, as the bones and texts have shown us, was a world away from that cinematic spectacle. The gladiator's strength was plant-based, a truth that feels almost counterintuitive today. Pop culture also loves the idea of the gladiator as a raging, bloodthirsty berserker, a notion that a diet of thick, cooling barley porridge directly contradicts. The myth is simply more exciting than the truth. It is far more thrilling to imagine a warrior feasting on boar and channeling that primal energy into combat than it is to picture him meticulously spooning up a lentil stew to optimize his endurance. Yet this is the real story, a narrative of calculated efficiency over brute indulgence. The gladiator was not a wild beast unleashed, but a professional athlete whose every meal was a deliberate step in his training regimen. His bowl of pose was as crucial to his success as his sword, so the next time you see a gladiator on screen, you will know the secret. The true power behind the legend was not a haunch of meat, but a humble, purposeful diet that turned grains and beans into one of history's most enduring symbols of strength. The principles that forged gladiators are being rediscovered in today's high-performance training centers. Modern endurance athletes, from marathon runners to Tour de France cyclists, are increasingly adopting a diet that will look very familiar to the Barley men. They have learned that for sustained effort, complex carbohydrates are king. That massive bowl of oatmeal an athlete eats before a long run serves the exact same purpose as the Gladiators' poles, loading their muscles with glycogen for hours of exertion. The shift is not just about tradition, it is about science. We now understand that a plant-based diet, rich in whole grains, legumes, and vegetables, reduces systemic inflammation. For an athlete, this means quicker recovery times and less muscle soreness, allowing for more frequent and intense training sessions. The Gladiators, through practical necessity, were benefiting from this very effect, their bodies recovering night after night from brutal physical punishment. Even the Gladiators' strange ash drink finds its parallel in the modern world. Today's athletes consume electrolyte powders and fortified recovery shakes packed with calcium and other minerals to strengthen bones and prevent stress fractures. The method is more refined, but the underlying goal is identical: to give the body the specific tools it needs to repair itself. This ancient approach challenges a deeply held modern belief that muscle is built exclusively on meat. The Gladiator's body, a testament to plant-powered strength, forces us to reconsider what true performance fuel really is. Perhaps the most advanced sports science was not invented in a lab, but was perfected centuries ago in the gritty kitchens of the Ludus. You can bring this ancient power meal to life in your own kitchen with just a few simple ingredients. Start with a generous cup of pearl barley, the modern equivalent of the coarse grain that fueled the arena. Rinse it well and add it to a heavy pot with 6 cups of water. Bring it to a boil, then let it simmer for about 40 minutes until the grains are swollen and tender, releasing their starchy energy into the water. While the barley cooks, take a cup of brown lentils, the same humble pulse that rebuilt a gladiator's muscles. Rinse them and set them aside. In a separate pan, heat a 1/4 cup of robust olive oil, that liquid gold of the ancient world. Chop a large onion and several cloves of garlic, then gently sauté them in the oil until they are soft and fragrant. This is where the flavor and the medicine begin, the antibacterial properties of the alliums merging with the rich fat. Now add the softened onions and garlic along with the raw lentils to the pot of cooked barley. Pour in another 2 cups of water and stir everything together. Let this hearty mixture simmer for another 30 minutes until the lentils have broken down and thickened the stew into a dense, porridge-like consistency. Season it only with a generous pinch of sea salt, as the Romans would have done. The final result is a thick, beige-colored stew, unassuming in appearance but powerful in its purpose. Ladle it into a deep bowl. The texture is hearty and substantial, each spoonful a mix of chewy barley and soft, earthy lentils. The flavor is simple, grounded, and deeply satisfying, dominated by the grain and the gentle, peppery note of the lentils, all rounded out by the rich undertone of olive oil. This is not a complex gourmet dish, it is functional fuel. Eating it, you can understand the slow-burning energy it provides, a feeling of solid sustenance that sits comfortably in your stomach, promising endurance rather than a quick rush. This simple pot of barley and lentils connects you directly to the daily reality of the Ludus kitchen, a taste of the relentless, plant-based power that built a legend. The true fuel of the arena was a quiet, relentless engine of plants. We have journeyed past the myth of the meat-eating brute and uncovered a warrior built on barley, sustained by beans, and armored by his own carefully cultivated physique. His strength was not a product of savage indulgence, but of disciplined, scientific nourishment. This changes everything about how we see these men. They were not primitive brawlers. They were elite endurance athletes, their bodies perfectly calibrated for survival through a diet that prioritized stamina over short-term power, resilience over rage. That layer of fat was a biological shield, the ash drink an ancient recovery tonic, and the simple stew a potent recipe for rebuilding muscle night after night. They were professionals, and their food was their most essential piece of equipment. So the next time history presents you with an accepted truth, a story that seems too simple or too familiar, remember the gladiator and his bowl of lentils. Question the myth. What other long-held beliefs about the ancient world are waiting to be overturned? Share your thoughts and the historical mysteries you want to see explored next in the comments below.